Stardust Chapter 7 Stardust Supplemental Files Part 3 Vatican issues statement asking for prayers for all those affected by attacks by invaders. Asks all congregations to open doors to those displaced by attacks. God judges us not by the wrath we have for our enemies, but by the compassion we have for our fellow man. Homeless man arrested in San Francisco found in possession of alien artifacts scavenged from attack on city disappears from custody. All evidence gathered found missing from evidence locker, PD computer systems wiped clean. PD station found abandoned next day by arriving officers. Warning: access to this file is restricted to personnel with top secret clearance or above. Attempts to access this file without authorization will be reviewed and be grounds for termination and/or prosecution. Distribution of this file may only be done with authorization from CMDR. David Bradford failure to provide authorization will result in termination and/or prosecution. Project ID Stardust. Project IV Xenobiology. Div Lead Dr. Joel Mills. Attached files. Analysis reports of tissue, blood, and hair samples from Twilight. Medical imaging footage varies from Twilight's personal notes by Div Lead. Personal notes follow. New record. 5 p.m., April 5th, 2015. Today we made arrangements for Twilight to be taken to medical. One floor up to use the scanning equipment, there not to mention procure physical samples. Quite frankly, I've been dying to see how her body operates as compared to the invaders, or even our own physiologies. After all, there's only so much we can tell just with the naked eye, and the plethora of monitoring equipment in the lab. From the trip to medical, we were able to determine the following. Twilight is warm-blooded and mammalian in nature, with the vast majority of her physiology extremely similar to Earth organisms. Side note, this was discovered earlier but also worth mentioning. Twilight species are herbivores and are completely comfortable eating fruits and vegetables, provided with no difficulty. Side note 2. Twilight is not only able to consume and gain nutrients from our fruits and vegetables, but she recognizes them from her own homeworld. Considering the mammalian nature of Twilight and the similarity of the described plant life, we may have a case of parallel evolution on a planetary scale. Side note 3. Twilight has also ascribed a desire for coffee whenever any is brought into the habitat. Requests were denied and coffee in the Stardust labs have been banned until further notice. 2. The key distinguishing feature of Twilight's skeletal structure, or horn, is comprised of bone and hollow, and has a significant amount of circulatory activity. It's quite apparent that the horn doesn't serve as the same function physically as the horns of Earth animals do. It's not meant to withstand impacts. 3. Scan of Twilight's brain shows that its acetylation quotient is roughly equivalent to humans. Further scans of Twilight's brain, especially during the magic tests, show something startling. The frontal lobe, or perhaps even a new lobe entirely, the possibilities, extends partially into the horn and lit up like a light on the imaging systems during the magic tests. The theory is that the section of the brain directly accesses and/or interfaces with whatever energy is used for her magic. Visual footage of Twilight using her magic also confirms that her horn does give off light during magic use, and the target for her magic also receives a similar aura. Anecdotal accounts provided by Twilight seem to indicate that the color of the light depends upon the user. In Twilight's case, it's a bright magenta. Further notes on Twilight's magical abilities can be described in Dr. Valen's department lead notes. 4. Analysis on Twilight's blood still indicates that it's functionally identical to blood from terrestrial analogs. It's even red. Analysis systems are still working on DNA structures to see if it bears any similarity to ours. 5. Hair samples are almost identical in makeup as human hair, being compromised of keratin. The colors of her mane, coat, and flank marks are inexplicably natural, as far as the machines can tell. 6. Imaging of her muscle structure shows that she is likely capable of feats of physicality that would only be possible to the most fit of humans. I note this specifically because Twilight describes herself as an academic and not physically oriented in her profession. The Earth ponies subspecies described in earlier notes must be significantly stronger if Twilight's descriptions are accurate, even without any of the described magical abilities. 7. Other systems in Twilight's body appear to have similar functions as Earth equivalents: heart, lungs, kidney, everything. The mountains of data used to come with the summary are attached with the notes. On a more personal note, today didn't go quite as expected. In the previous days, Twilight has always been extremely eager for every one of our discussions. There was an equal amount to give and take as she both asked and answered questions. All answers were within the established security restrictions, and Twilight did not push any subject after she was informed of the said restrictions. Today, however, she was withdrawn and skittish. Her answers were short and clipped, and she stuck to Shen and the two volunteers more often than not. Kim noticed this behavior as well and took this as further evidence of the herd mentality of Twilight's culture. The only question now is what may have triggered our, Kim and I, exclusion from the herd. Furthermore, I was in observation and was able to overhear Shen's initial explanation of today's plans, as well as everyone in attendance. Then she seemed to have no adverse reaction to it until after we gathered to head to medical. Perhaps it's the technology angle? After all, a culture without the need for technology might be intimidated by mundane devices that can replicate their natural abilities. Twilight was extremely hesitant to participate in the medical imaging processes until Shen volunteered to use them first. I suppose we should all be thankful for Shen's presence. He always seems to know exactly what to say to calm any anxiety. Perhaps it would be the thought of leaving the lab. For really what we know of Twilight's arrival and the time here on Earth, it had ranged from unpleasant to downright life-threatening, except for within the lab itself. First a chrysalid attack, which would be enough to unhinge anyone, then ending up in containment. Oh, hell. Update. 8:25 a.m., April 6, 2015. I spoke with Frank at his suggestion and reviewed all previous record contacts with Twilight, and I think I found her answer. Kim, Valen, and I were all present shortly before Twilight's escape, and it's likely seeing all of us together brought back that memory of Twilight. Shen obviously didn't take part in that little fiasco, and the two volunteers had their helmets on until their official introduction. So, that's why I suspect Twilight considers them safe. I know she's just doing her job, but Valen's effect on Twilight is extremely inconvenient. That Ice Queen is also doing nothing to adjust her attitude to accommodate Twilight. Seriously, it would kill her to crack a smile once in a while, or maybe answer a question or two. Looks like our job got a little bit more complicated. At least we can count on the presence of Shen and the volunteers to placate Twilight if necessary. On that subject, Shen and Valen are getting increasingly terse in their exchanges. If it weren't anyone but Valen, I'd say something to try and diffuse the tension, but I value my life too much. I bring up that animosity during my next checkup with Frank. Maybe he could suggest something to help those two resist the impulse to strangle each other? The XCOM project doesn't exactly have an HR department for this sort of thing, so I really hope that it doesn't come to that. In the light of developing situations, Frank has also read into the program and will be observing Twilight over the next few days. I'm hoping he'll be able to give us some guidance on how to diffuse the tension with Twilight, not to mention around the lab. End log. Project ID Stardust, Project IV Supplemental, Div Lead Dr. Frank McKendrick, attached files, personal notes by Div Lead. Personal notes follow. New record, 9:30 a.m., April 6, 2015. There's times when this job erodes the soul. I get young men and women coming into my office and they tell me about their best friend being burned alive, or they had to shoot him to pieces because one of those damn monsters got inside of his head, or implanted by the bugs. They come to me to relieve the burdens this damn war gives them, and all I can do for them, it kills me every little time to see them so broken in their heads and hearts. There's times where this job erodes the soul, and for once I'm pleasantly surprised that this isn't one of them. This all started a couple days ago when I was informed I would be needing to perform evaluations on Dr. Shen, from engineering as well as several new people. Parameters for evaluation involve not only stress factors, but also mental tampering. I was initially intrigued since the vast majority of my visitors are soldiers returning from missions or recurring issues, but I was also well aware that asking too many questions might put me in a terrible predicament. After discussing things with Dr. No, Mills, and Shen, it felt like my assistance may be needed with the project itself, and I was given permission to view the subject of the project. Imagine my surprise when the subject of the project was a little purple unicorn, with big eyes and highlighted hair. I suppose that makes sense for the concerns of the doctors. They had to worry about passive mind control to induce trust, but after reviewing the subject, I think we can safely rule that out. After the descriptions of what the doctors were feeding, combined with this appearance, I think it's just a natural human reaction to what we would see as a cute, furry animal. There's a reason why cats rule the internet, after all. I didn't speak with the subject, but I observed her during an animated discussion with Dr. Shen. I did notice some of the signs of obsessive-compulsive disorder that Shen had hinted at. The desk supplies are all stacked and ordered in exact spacing. The bed is immaculately made, and I've seen the pictures arranged in her room organized in a very specific pattern. Pictures lining her desk were described as her closest friends, and the pictures of her rulers are above the desk, and rating out from whether they are the remainders, sorted by the species, and further sorted by color and sex if applicable. During observation, Kim and Joel also described what sounds like the onset of PTSD. Prior to her arrival on Earth, it seems Twilight lived a simple life as a librarian. With her first 6 hours of arriving on our planet, she was nearly killed by a chrysalid and then dissected by Valen. The first part alone would give any civilian a good start towards an anxiety disorder, but I suspect waking up in front of Valen and not being human would only make things so much worse. As to her current behavior to the volunteers and the science team, I'm afraid I can only speculate. Based on evidence gathered so far, it is a reasonable assumption that Twilight species' social structures are herd-based, probably a relic to their most primitive days. Herds meaning safety and companionship. Being cut off from herd means isolation and danger. Her initial friendliness towards everyone is like a subconscious attempt to establish a substitute herd from comfort and safety. I have little doubt that seeing Joel and Kim with Valen caused their expulsion from a little herd. The question now is, how can this be rectified? On the subject of Valen, I should stop and see how she's doing. She's been missing her scheduled appointments for about 2 weeks now, and I'm starting to worry that her stress and position and the attack on Cologne is really affecting her judgment. Kim and Joel have both described her as increasingly agitated. End log. Project IV Stardust, Project IV Physics, Div Lead Dr. Moira Valen, attached files, visual footage of subject performing abilities, medical imaging footage, various, of subject, personal notes by Div Lead. Personal notes follow. New record, 5 p.m., April 5th, 2015. With testing procedures limited to non-invasive methods, I made the decision to move the subject to medical for the advanced imaging equipment present there. While it would have been plausible to have this equipment moved to the Stardust lab, it would have been done one piece at a time, as the lab simply doesn't have room for all the imaging equipment to be run simultaneously. I also wanted to see how the subject reacted after being removed from its habitat for most of the day. Anxiety and hesitation were clearly present. Good. The subject needs to realize that it isn't here for comfort or enjoyment or to make friends. The sole reason for its continued existence is to provide us with information to help save our world. The others who have come into contact with the subject may also need to be reminded of this fact also. The subject is not a pet, nor a friend or a mascot, or the grandchild you never had. It's an alien from another world with capacities beyond what we can measure and motivations the human mind cannot fathom. I'll be speaking with Dr. McKendrick to watch the others for excessive attachment to the specimen. There will come a time when Twilight is no longer useful to this project and will be discarded just like anything else. Medical imaging technology has revealed a great deal about the internal structure of this subject, as well as confirmed one theory of mine while disproving others. I had expected to find a similar brain structure to the sectoid specimens detailed from Project Redacted, with enhanced synaptic activity as well as implants to further enhance this activity. What was found was a brain completely devoid of any surgical activity or alteration. Instead, this was an entirely neural section compromised of synapses, even further enhanced than the sectoid samples previously captured. This neural section is also extending particularly into the subject's horn, which I now theorize works as a natural projector for these abilities in place of implants. The implications are disturbing. The invaders have to genetically engineer troops and install implants in them to get the abnormal abilities we've witnessed, but now we've stumbled across a species that not only has these abilities naturally, but with an order of magnitude greater effect and control. On that note, the monitoring arrays continue to fail to detect anything anomalous when the subject uses its abilities. Regardless, we will begin cataloging the various abilities of the subject starting tomorrow, and the subject is going to attempt to explain the mechanics as well. I expect nothing more than a few flowery versions of a wizard did it. End log. Project ID Stardust, Project IV Physics, Div Lead Dr. Mara Valen, attached files, footage of multiple subject abilities, transcripted, translated by Dr. Mills, personal notes by Div Lead. Personal notes follow. New record, 5 p.m., April 13th, 2015. Attached to this update is a list of abilities demonstrated by the subject, their effects, and well-known as limitations as discovered over the past week. A brief description of global ability mechanics is summarized below. For the full and exhaustive explanation, please view Dr. Mill's transcripts. The activization and utilization of subject's abilities is a three-step process. 1. Energy gathering. The subject describes this step as gathering energy from a field to power the chosen ability. An appropriate amount must be gathered or the intended ability may not be activated or may misfire. 2. Ability formulation. The subject shapes the raw energy to create the desired effect. Improper formulation may result in ability failure or misfire. 3. Ability activation. The subject chooses an object or location for the ability to target and activates the ability. If the object or location is outside of the scope, or steps 1 of 2, then the intended effect may not occur or may have significantly increased effect. Definition of field. Attempts to detect this field have all failed, just as do other detection equipment, and has also failed to detect anything being amiss during the ability usage. Restrictions on ability usage appear to be divided into two categories. 1. Power capacity. The ability to access this field is described in a similar fashion that the muscles correlate to physical strength. Practicing the use of complex and varied abilities creates the amount of power the specimen can draw on, but there are high and low peaks in this capacity. The low peak is the maximum that can be drawn after lapsing in ability usage. The highest peak is the maximum that can be drawn while participating in exercises. Attempts to use these abilities without the minimum required power capacity may result in ability failure, misfire, or death. Ability Formulae. Each ability has a corresponding formulae that must be conceptualized in the subject's mind, in order to shape the energy into its most usable and efficient form. Without the formulae, the results may vary or fail entirely. The subject also noted that this doesn't apply in certain cases. For instance, her entire subspecies, unicorn, possesses telekinesis from a very early age and doesn't require anything to study or to use it, though study and practice does improve fine control and scope of use. Abilities to relate to the special talent, see Dr. No's notes, discovered in adolescence and also significantly is easier to activate and control, even if it may be beyond the specimen's abilities comparatively. Summary of abilities tested listed below. 1. Telekinesis Tk. The indirect influence of the mind on the physical world without contacting the affected targets. Line of sight is required to activate the ability but not maintain it. Activation is nearly instantaneous, and subjects held with Tk appear to be weightless but still retain their mass. Objects with significant mass take effort to be physically moved through the air, but the only resistance the object encounters is air resistance. Inversely, if the subject specifies an object can be held in place and resists all attempts to move it. Video example of Corporal Matt Harris attempting to push a quarter and failing. Attempts to move objects held in this manner were restricted to what was located within the lab. More thoroughly testing may need to be attempted in the hangar, with sufficient power can be applied without risk to personnel or the lab. And the subject is able to apply TK to multiple objects while maintaining fine control. Objects used in this test was a deck of bicycle playing cards shuffled in the thrown air. Subject was able to apply telekinesis to every card within 0.5 seconds. And it was able to sort the deck numerically and by the suit within 5 seconds before replacing it in its box. Complex objects can be manipulated simultaneously. Through the number of items that can be simultaneously manipulated drops off as complexity of these items increases. Object weight appears to have little effect on the speed at which TK is applied, through again object weights were somewhat limited due to the size constraints of the lab. Weight tested around from 1 gram to 250 kilograms. 2. Teleportation, or TP, the transfer between 2 points without traversing the physical space between them. This ability is primarily restricted by the line of sight, but vivid memories of locations can be used to target locations. Activation for short distance jumps are approximately 0.5 to 1 second. And the amount of energy required to transport is directly related to the distance traveled and the amount of matter being transported. The subject used this specific justification for not simply going to use TP to go home. The subject was not certain of the distance between Earth and her planet world, and would not be able to judge the energy required. TP travel is instantaneous between 2 points and can go through solid matter, so long as the line of sight is still present, or the requisite memory of the area is still available. TP may affect the subject or other items or other beings. Items teleported in experiments include the following: the subject, 2 pens, a chair, various fruits and vegetables, and Private Jenkins. There is currently no way to prevent TP aside from restricting the subject's movement and to prevent visualization of new areas to TP to. If the above information is correct, then the being that used TP onto the subject to send her to Earth must have used 3 things at its disposal: knowledge of the distance between Earth and its place of origin, knowledge of Earth-specific locations to use TP, and staggering amounts of energy to draw upon the completed TP. 3. Light generation, LG, the creation of light without using a detectable source. The line of sight is required to activate this ability, but not required to maintain it. Activation is nearly instantaneous. Visually, the ability appears to create a ball of soft lavender light, approximately the size of a baseball. LG can be manipulated to create several light sources, move them at will, or attach them to surfaces where they can be moved without further input from the subject. LG generates neither heat nor any other detectable effect other than the corresponding increase in candles. Attempts to touch the light source results in no change or noticeable side effects on volunteers. 4. Translation, TN. providing the ability for communications across language barriers. This ability is restricted to line of sight with the subject and may only be cast on the sapient's being capable of language. Activation is approximately 1 to 2 seconds. Activation time is decreased after every subsequent usage. Subject under the effect of this ability can almost flawlessly understand anything spoken by other subjects under this effect. This has been tested and confirmed with all currently affected by this ability. Although appearing benign in its mechanics, caution is recommended for anyone thinking of participating with this ability, as the mechanics are unknown and may result in mental tampering. There exists a variation of the ability that can be used on written works, but is significantly less accurate. Transformation, TRN, the ability to flawlessly change matter from one form to another. This ability is restricted to line of sight with the subject. Activation varies depending on the complexity of the TRN. Tests thus far have been transforming simple objects into other simple objects, and require extensive knowledge of the end result to be transformed. Tests include transforming fruits and vegetables into other fruits and vegetables. Testing the results of these experiments showed them to be edible and nearly identical to Earth equivalents. Private Jenkins consumed an apple, formerly a pear, and commented as follows: "Is this how all your apples taste like where you're from? That's amazing." Private Jenkins is yet to experience any ill side effects. Turn appears to last as long as a spell is channeled by the subject, and attempts to test on live specimens were refused by the subject. Crush, CR, the application of raw physical force against a target. Demonstration of this ability was requested, but the subject refused to comply. Repeated requests resulted in the subject becoming non-compliant, and testing was halted for the day as the subject retreated to her habitat after repeated requests. What information can be gained about this ability is from the interviews from Corporal Matt Harris, and armor cam footage from Operation Hammerhead. Reasonable assumption is that it requires line of sight like previous abilities. Activation time in video is nearly instantaneous, though speculation is that this may have been an accelerated activation due to the prospect of death, so close at hand. The degree of force projecting is staggering, and higher than the impact tolerance of any structure we can currently create. We'll come back to this test once more the subject has become more compliant. The subject has hinted at several other abilities that stretch the imagination, some of which she is capable of, while others are produced by artifacts found on her world. Some are believable, wearable artifacts designed to increase abilities, but others I refuse to believe. A pool capable of creating perfect copies of anyone who looks into it? Time travel? The only thing that's preventing me from writing all of this off as the ravings of a lunatic is the fact that this creature so easily violates so many of the established laws of reality that we thought was set in stone. I had to take video footage from the TRN experience to Frank to confirm that this wasn't sort of mass hallucination. And all throughout these experiments, we weren't able to find anything as to how it's accomplished. My eyes are witnessing these violations of science, and in the case of the TRN experiments, there's physical evidence of it happening. But how? How? Further experiments will commence as soon as the subject has become more compliant. End log.